St. Mark's Cathedral acknowledges that we gather on the traditional land of the first people of Seattle, the Duwamish people who are still here, and we honor with gratitude the land itself and the life of all the Coast Salish tribes. It is a delight for us to be here this morning in Bloedel Hall and joining all over the world, actually, on Zoom. We have people across the diocese and across the Episcopal Church, and from Canada, Sweden, Britain. I may have lost track of others, but there's over 200 people who have signed on to participate today, and we're delighted for that. We're delighted to have the Reverend Canon Dr. Mary Crist here with us. Just a couple of housekeeping details for those in the room. There are snacks over here along with water, and there's also coffee, tea, and water service on this side. Bathrooms, women's is in the hallway off to this side of the stage, and men's off this side of the stage. There are all gender single bathrooms upstairs, and if you'll just ask one of the cathedral staff, we can get you pointed in that direction. They're on the 5th floor. We are hosting several different things. This is what this cathedral is designed to do. So we have a community group, the Seattle School of Theology and Psychology, upstairs in the nave for their matriculation service. We have a Buddhist meditation group that often meets in this space, and they're over in Skinner Hall in our St. Nicholas building. And we have ministry groups that are meeting on campus today as well. So if you got a parking space already, count yourself fortunate. Again, we're delighted that you're here. Tomorrow, let me just highlight that Dr. Crist will be preaching at the 9 and 11 o'clock services at St. Mark's Cathedral. The 11 o'clock service will be live streamed off the St. Mark's website as well. And she'll also be participating in a very informal forum in this space at the 10 o'clock hour. And we're delighted for all of that. We're delighted that you're here. We're also delighted that Bishop Rickel really was eager to help co-sponsor this event. And even though he is out of town, he's actually at CPG board meeting in New York. We are delighted for the partnership with the Office of the Bishop. And I would like to call on a person who is no stranger to St. Mark's Cathedral, the Reverend Canon Carla Robinson, who serves as the Canon for Multicultural Ministries and Community Transformation and Ethnic Ministries Circles of Color. Carla.
Thank you, Dean Thomason. It is always good to be home. I do have the pleasure of serving on the bishop's staff, and I bring you greetings from him today. We are thrilled to be in partnership with the cathedral for this event, and I'm sure that the bishop would be delighted to see how many people are here, as well as joining us online. The Reverend Canon Mary Crist is enrolled Blackfeet from the Douglas family in Babb, Montana. She earned her Bachelor's of Art at the University of California, Berkeley, her Master of Divinity at the Episcopal Theological School, Claremont School of Theology, and her Doctor of Education at Teachers College, Columbia University in New York. She is the former Dean of the Metcalf School of Education and professor in the Online and Professional Studies Division at California Baptist University in Riverside. She has a little experience with the Baptist Church. She told a remarkable story about that a little earlier about bringing the heat. We know something about bringing the heat. She has been active in Indigenous ministries throughout our diocese for many years and in many ways. She currently serves at St. Michael's Ministry Center in Riverside, California, and is the coordinator of Indigenous theological education in the Department of Ethnic Ministries in the Office of the Presiding Bishop. Mary, you honor us with your presence, and we welcome you.
And as she's turning hers on, just a reminder that if you're going to speak in the room, you must have the microphone so that folks at home can hear you.
I think we're on. Can you hear me all right? Okay, good. Well, Saturday mornings are precious, so I want to thank each of you for being here, and especially all of those who are also online. I've done a lot of Zoom meetings, sitting and watching. I haven't done this many presenting, so it's a little bit nerve-wracking, but I think it's going to go well, and I want to thank you for being here. As you can see, we have an ambitious agenda today. It says exploring, not mastering Indigenous theology. So we'll do what we can do in 3 hours, but I tested my slides with my beloved husband of 45 years, who is also a priest, and in one of those little boxes back there on Zoom, and it generated good conversation. So I think we'll have 2 breakout groups. Hi, I see some familiar faces. I taught a course on the doctrine of discovery and about 1.5 years ago to some of you from this diocese, so, and some I know from other things. But I think we will have lots to talk about. We will have 2 small group breakouts. I wish they could be longer. Truthfully, we could do a 3-day retreat on this subject. So we'll whet your appetite today, and I appreciate your interest, and we'll just do what we can do in 3 hours. Yeah. And we're learning how to coordinate changing slides here. I have notes up here, but Greg is going to do the real deal back there. So let me see what is happening here with my cursor. I'm going to go into the slideshow. So there we go. I'd like to open with a prayer, and I'll read it, but if you feel inclined, you are more than welcome to read it with me. A prayer for healing and hope. O great Spirit, God of all people and every tribe, through whom all people are related, call to the kinship of all your people. Grant us vision to see through the lens of our baptismal covenant, the brokenness of the past. Help us to listen to you and to one another in order to heal the wounds of the present. And give us courage, patience, and wisdom to work together for healing and hope with all your people, now and in the future. Mend the hoop of our hearts and let us live in justice and peace. Through Jesus Christ, the one who comes to all people, that we might live in dignity. Amen. Did you know that the Episcopal Church has over 400 years of history with the indigenous people of North America? There's a wonderful book that can be purchased on this topic. It was written by the indigenous missioner many years ago, Owana Anderson, and the book is called 400 Years. It's in paperback now, at least the copy I got, but I encourage you, if you're really interested in the history, she tells it the way it is. And it wasn't always pretty, but it wasn't always ugly either. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. But Owana, O-W-A-N-A-H, Anderson, and it's available. I happen to get my copy from Amazon, so you may be able to pick up a copy if you want. Do you know that many indigenous spiritual beliefs are quite compatible with the teachings of Jesus? I think that you'll see that also in a few minutes. Did you know that you can't hear? Oh, okay. Can we turn me up a little bit? I can talk louder. Is that better? Okay, I've been holding my voice down because I'm a teacher and I have a big voice. And usually if I'm mic'd, people are like, no, 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 no. I can turn myself up. Okay, good. Thank you, Kathy. Did you know that Indigenous people can be Christians and honor their tribal or national spiritual beliefs at the same time? And we do. So today we're going to discover how to use two-eye seeing, which actually comes from science education, and vision quests and sacred stories to explore Indigenous theology. And I'm involving intentionally some Indigenous leaders from the Episcopal Church. I think you'll see that as we go through. We will explore what Indigenous leaders in the Episcopal Church say about being both Native and Christian, and how theological education itself is expanding. And that's my job, is to facilitate that. I work in Indigenous theological education. I work with dioceses, with seminaries, with individual churches, depending upon what the needs are. And you'll hear a little bit about that at the end of our presentation. I love this C.S. Lewis quote. We cannot go back and change the beginning, but what we can do is start where we are now and create a different ending. And I think that applies to a lot of things that are going on in the world today. Now, we're going to begin with a very short, small group get acquainted, because I'm about to go into a traditional Native policy, which is for me to introduce myself and my people. I don't want to do that until you've had a chance to get to know who you're sitting with. So the people at home will do this in their small groups online, and the people here will also do it. You're only going to have 1 minute each, and there are going to be 5 in a group. So you're going to have to be really disciplined, because remember, we only have 3 hours. Unless you want to stay until 4 or 5 o'clock, that's okay with me, because I'm not going anywhere, but I think you probably have places to go. So I'm going to suggest that you have a timekeeper and just be brutal about it. You know, we're Episcopalians. We really like to get on a roll, but then we'll be here for 30 minutes and not good. So if anyone prefers not to speak, it's perfectly all right to pass. And at the end of the time, those of you on Zoom, you will come back to the large group automatically, God willing. And so your only job is to tell who you are, where you are from, and why you came to this meeting. Now, if you can get more than that done in your 1 minute, that's okay. But one person in each group, just get your watch and just knock on the table when the minute is up. Fair enough? All right. I think we're at the timeline now, so we'll go on to our next slide. And I hope this gave you a chance to get acquainted a little bit. I see some familiar faces from the class, and that's really wonderful. I'll talk louder, that will help, but I'm going to tell you, if you don't hear me, just wave. This is not when I talk about my ancestry and some of the things we'll talk about, it's not easy. And when I'm talking about things that are intimate, my voice will drop. It's because it just makes me think of it all. So I'll try to be loud, and if I'm not, just wave to me. We're going to meet some of my relatives now. I come from the Blackfeet Nation in Browning, Montana. My mother was born in Cardston, Alberta. That's the nearest hospital to the town where she lived. And she and my mother, whose name was also my grandmother rather, grew up in the little town of Bab St. Mary's. So if you've ever been to the Blackfeet Reservation, you'll know that it has 5 different villages, and the village that my grandmother came from is on the Canadian border. And well, the story will unfold. I won't tell you all in the first slide. This gives you an idea of the layout of the Blackfeet/Blackfoot people. Now, people always ask me, is it Blackfeet or Blackfoot? Well, it depends on whether you're in Canada or the US, because as you can see on the drawing, the boundary between Canada and the US cut us into 1/3 US and 2/3 Canadian. So if you refer to our cousins in the Confederacy who live in Canada, in Alberta, they are referred to as Blackfoot. And if you refer to those of us in Montana, we are called Blackfeet. It's not such a pejorative name as it sounds. It just refers to the fact that we were plains people, and we always had soot from the fire on the bottom of the moccasins. So that's why that name came about. And we're referred to as the Blackfeet Nation. And it's not pejorative to call us Indians in our particular case, because that's the name of the football team and the sports teams at Browning High School. They're the Browning Indians. And so, you know, that naming is tricky, but you can see I am from the people that you see here just south of the border, and we're called Amskapi Pikani, which means southernmost people. Pikani, Pikuni, also has a synonymous name, which is pronounced Pagan, but it's spelled in the US as Piegan. But in Canada, the same word is spelled Peigan. So our real name is either Pikani or Pagan, but Blackfeet is what everybody knows us by. And there was another tribal component south of our people, but it's not functioning any longer. So every 2 or 3 years, the Blackfeet Confederacy has a ride, a horseback ride that begins in Calgary and comes all the way south into Montana. And there's a video that's been made about that. We are on the border of Glacier National Park, and Glacier National Park was originally part of our land. And there's a picture of several of the Blackfeet leaders in Washington, D.C., signing a treaty that said, if you will let us make that land into a national park, we will give you forever hunting rights and fishing rights and housing rights and all of these good things that of course never came to be. When the people came home, they had to buy a hunting and fishing license like everyone else. That's not the case today, but it was the case then. So that was a very sad situation. Here are some, if we go to the next slide now, here are some of the Blackfeet women in my family. The woman pictured by herself is my great grandmother. And we have names. I have a name that was given to me in a naming ceremony. My name is Pitaki, which means eagle woman. Her name, now don't laugh because it would be disrespectful, but I'll understand if you sort of smile. Her name was Mary Comes by Mistake. And the reason she was given that name is because she's from the Cree people. And the Cree people were basically enemies with the Blackfeet people. But one of my male relatives from the Blackfeet Nation fell in love with Mary and brought her back to the reservation. And she was apparently quite a wonderful person because they fell in love with her and gave her the name Comes by Mistake because she didn't belong there, but they liked her anyway, so they kept her. That's the story of my great-great-grandmother. And then on the left, you can see my grandmother and her mother. And my grandmother is in the row at the top all the way to the left. So in front of her is her sister Florence, and then to her side is her mother, Florence. Actually, Mary Comes by Mistake is my great-great-grandmother. because Mary in the top row, Mary Douglas, is my grandmother. And then those are her sisters, but in the middle of the lower row is her mother, Florence. And she also had a daughter named Florence, and Annie, Lavon, and just, there were all of, she was one, there were 6 girls and 3 boys. And what happened is that during relocation days, they left the reservation and moved to Everett, Washington, just north of here, where Rachel's church is. And they lived there because there was nothing else to eat on the reservation. My grandmother moved to South Texas with her brood. And so my mother, when she was about 6 years old, they moved to Texas, and we lived, and I lived, she lived there and married my father, and they, he was a farmer, and my father came from Copenhagen, Denmark. So I am a Viking Indian. Tough person. Now, these are some of our relatives from the reservation at the airport where they went with us to fly when we flew home last summer. And this is my husband in the black shirt. And then the other people are from the reservation. And the reason I show them is because after all of my relatives had died off, basically my grandmother and all of her sisters and brothers, and they were no longer on the reservation, and there was no reason for me to go to the reservation except to be a tourist. And so I didn't want to do that. But I was at a professional organization annual meeting, and I met this woman in the purple shirt. She has a master's degree in Indigenous gifted education. So she needed to get that. Her son and her husband, they are the parents of Adrian Wagner, who is the first Blackfeet graduate of Stanford University in musical composition and classics. He's a brilliant young man. And today he heads the music department and the choir for all the kids in Browning public schools on the reservation. And Edith is a teacher in the schools, working in math education, science education, and gifted education. Her husband, Gerald, is in charge of environmental office, environmental welfare for the tribe. And their daughter in the front, Jovan, is just about to graduate with a degree in journalism. Our people really value education. And we will close this session today with not a great quality clip, but it will be Chief Earl Oldperson giving a story of the buffalo and a prayer. And he is the one whose signature financed my undergraduate education. So we're only 19,000 people today. We were actually down to 2,000. And so we were almost killed off, but we're still here. And that's what we all say. We're still here. We didn't die off in Hollywood. We're still here. We're still here. Next slide, please. These are the Rocky Mountains, which my people call the backbone of Mother Earth. And when you go from Great Falls, Montana to get to the reservation, you go north about 50 miles out of Great Falls on Highway 15 and make a left turn, go 125 miles and you're there. But as you're approaching, you can see the beautiful, beautiful Rocky Mountains. The mountain in the background that looks like a table, I think of it as an altar, is called Chief Mountain. And that is our most holy mountain. And that is where people go for vision quests. We will talk about vision quests a little later in this. Our women do not do vision questing, however. You need to know that. Not all tribes let the women go on vision quests. The men do the vision questing. And the two warriors that you see in the front were the product. There are 4 at each gateway to the reservation. They're made of found objects from a junkyard by 2 really talented Blackfeet artists. So they just got car parts and made the warriors, and they welcome people at the 4 main entrances to the reservation. This is the Marias River, where 173 Blackfeet people, including some of my relatives, died in 1870 in the Baker Massacre. It was a surprise attack on Chief Heavy Runner's camp, and most of his family was killed. He was killed also. So this is a place that we revere as a holy place where our ancestors lost their lives, the Marias River, known Baker Massacre. Well, the question becomes one of, well, how did the Episcopal Church get involved in all of this? Well, it didn't get involved very much at all with the Blackfeet because we were warriors and we were high enough in the US and over to the corner that we could see what was happening. And someone had a dream that when the Iron Horse began laying tracks in our area, that we would die. So we got there first. And the Blackfeet were vicious warriors to anyone trying to come on the land. And they were able to keep the land relatively free for a long, long time until the buffalo were all gone. When the buffalo were all gone, there was nothing to eat. So our tribe pretty much fell in on itself because the whole structure for the men was based upon hunting and hunting buffalo. And for the women, it was dressing the buffalo. And the buffalo was the backbone of our economy. So when the last buffalo were killed, it was 1900. And we pretty much fell apart at that time. And relocation didn't come for another 50 years. So we had what were called starvation winters, when people literally died because there was nothing to eat. And it was very, very cold. Well, so the Episcopal Church was really not part of that. There is not much of an Episcopal presence in the whole state today. There is a diocese, and Bishop Carol Gallagher did some work there a few years ago, but it's not a big presence. However, let's look at where it began for us. We started with Sir Francis Drake, and the year was 1579, and we interacted by accident with the indigenous people on the West Coast around San Francisco, the Ohlone Confederacy. If you don't know about the Ohlone Confederacy, that's a story of its own, but I will tell you that the Ohlone Confederacy was 7 or 8 different tribes within the Confederacy, different nations, we call them sovereign nations. And that was the most linguistically rich area among the native people in the whole country, was those tribal, because it was 7, 8, I believe, different languages. So it wasn't just dialects, each one was a different language. So it's very rich linguistically. And then of course, Jamestown Colony, you know the story there. And then in the early 1800s in Washington, Bishop Henry Hobart, John Henry Hobart, began a mission to the Oneida people in upstate New York. And by the mid-1800s, that mission work had spread north and west into North and South Dakota, where a lot of our history with the church took place there. This photograph shows that the Episcopal Church missions to the Native Americans did begin under Bishop Hobart, but had reached the Oneidas by the early 19th century. And then it spread from North and South Dakota. It also included Wisconsin and Minnesota by the 1850s. So we had a lot of activity in 50 or so short years in terms of Native ministry and Native outreach. This is Bishop Whipple. Bishop Whipple was the first bishop of Minnesota, and he was an advocate for the people. And Minnesota became the scene of a major evangelical attempt to convert the Native people to become Christians. He was very, very compassionate and sympathetic to the Native people. He was the chair of the government commission on the massacre of Custer's force at Little Bighorn, and he advocated successfully for the establishment of the Episcopal Church's first Indian Commission under the Domestic and Foreign Missionary Society, DFMS, Board of Missions. He is known for having interceded to obtain Lincoln's clemency in the capital punishment of 269 Native Americans taken as war prisoners. And unfortunately, 38 of them were still publicly hanged. What was going on there, the backstory to that was too many resources were being spent in fighting Native people in Minnesota and Dakotas, and the Civil War was going on. So President Lincoln basically said, get that thing under control. And our bishop, because of his intervention, kept the deaths down to 38, but 38 were still hanged. And they went and they were hanged on Christmas Day to make matters worse. They're called the Dakota 38. You can read about the Dakota Indian Wars, which happened, which were initiated by the natives, and the reason being they had nothing to eat. And they went to the bureau, to the agency, and they asked for food. And the story is that the agent told them, if you're hungry, eat grass. There's plenty of grass. And that so angered and humiliated the men who went in that they shot up some people afterwards. And it started what are called the Dakota Indian Wars, but probably should better be more accurately called the War for Food. But that's Bishop Whipple. And then we have a picture here of the Dakota Indians in Minnesota with not Bishop Whipple, but a different person, I don't know who the clergy person is. These come from the archives. That was 1897. And then the next picture shows us Enmagabo. And Enmagabo was our first Episcopal Indian priest or native priest. He was ordained in 1867, so about 2 years after the Civil War, right on the end of the Civil War. And this was 57 years before Native Americans were made US citizens. So he was ordained a priest, but he couldn't be a citizen. And his people couldn't be citizens for 57 more years. Our next gentleman is Bishop Harold Jones, first Native American bishop. And the quote is made, and forgive me for not, I'll have to go back and put exactly who said it. This was a direct quote said about him when he had passed away. He'd give you the shirt off his back and never check to see if he had a spare. He was really not only an advocate, but a terrifically humane individual. Said he brought many of the characteristics of the best of Native American culture with him to his Christian expression. That's Bishop Jones. And so now we're going to take a look at what's going on in Indian country today in the Episcopal Church. You'll notice that I switch back and forth Native American, Indian, and Indigenous. Indigenous is the present term of preference and the most correct because it refers to people whose land was taken by other people while they were still living on it. So Indigenous doesn't restrict itself to people in North America. There are indigenous people of Africa, of Mexico, of South America, but to say Native Americans, the way it's used commonly in our use in this country, it leaves out all the native people of Mexico or points south. So Indigenous is the correct term. And in Canada, the term is First Nations people. So these are some of our people at Standing Rock. You can see this tall person to the left here is Bishop Lateem from Alaska. And we were there protesting. Here's another picture. These are the water protectors protesting the Dakota Access Pipeline in 2016. A lot of the major Christian denominations sent people to Standing Rock, and there was quite a camp. Did any of you go? Were any of people from this? Yes, Rachel. It was a huge gathering. And the protest was the pipeline will ultimately leak. And guess what? It did. After they got it in, it did leak. So the people were right all along, but this is an example of a lot of the things. The reason I'm showing you these is because for a lot of folks, the Native American presence or Indigenous presence in the Episcopal Church is invisible. Like people don't know we're here. And one of the reasons that we do things like we're doing today is when we're delighted to come and tell the story, because guess what? We are here. But we're a relatively quiet people. And in our culture, it's not good manners to be self-promotional. So if we got a Nobel Prize, you probably wouldn't hear about it. You know, because it's really bad manners to say, oh, guess what? I'm da 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 da. I mean, we don't even really, it's hard for me to write a little bio like that because, you know, it sounds like I'm tooting my own horn, and we don't do that. So it's a different culture thing. This is 2018 at Good Shepherd Church in Fort Defiance, Arizona, in Navajo land. The Navajo people now have, I believe, 6 ordained priests and deacons. 4 are ordained priests in the last few years. And as you know, you have 2 ordained in this diocese now. And I'm 3. I'm sorry. 3. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to leave that 3rd one out. I knew a little bit more about 2 of them, but congratulations because, pardon? You're the 3rd one, but not recent. That's those 2. I should have said recently ordained, but yes, I know Rachel, of course. Okay. So this is my boss. Those of you who don't know, the gentleman on the top line behind the presiding bishop with the stole that has the red cross, that's Brad Hoff. He's the Indigenous missioner for Native work, or for Indigenous. He's the Indigenous missioner for the Episcopal Church. So he is my boss. And he's really great to work with. He's been here before. You probably already have met him. Yeah. This is Winter Talk, which is an event we have typically in January every year. This one was here in Seattle, and it was 2 years ago before COVID came, and we had 91 people here. And the next year we had 130, but they were all online because we couldn't, and we thought last year we were going to get together, and Brad and his advisory council did a lot of work putting it together. And then at the last minute, the powers that be said, no, it's not safe. So we still had to do it online. So we're trying again. We're very hopeful this coming January that we would be able to get together. So this is a gathering of Native Episcopalians from all over the country. It's really an amazing gathering. This picture is a picture of the women I work with in Los Angeles. This is called a Talking Circle Ministry. We have 95 people in the ministry. This just happens to be a smaller group that gathered on a Saturday, and we were making those long sticks are made by the Shumash, and they're called clackers. And we had to sand them down and then split them. And then when you go like this with them, they make a noise, kind of like a rattle or a clacking. And they're part of the Shumash people from Malibu, California area. And we had a Shumash woman in the circle, and she said, I'll teach you how to make those if you want to. So we all got together on a Saturday and we made them. So we meet every Tuesday night on Zoom. We have a support group that we started when we had to stop meeting in person. And then after COVID allowed us to meet once a month on the first Saturday of every month. But we, in this case now, we meet on Zoom, and it became, for me, it's a time of pastoral care. So it's not required, and the people who come tend to have something going on in their life that they want to celebrate or they need prayers for. So we do meet electronically every week, and it means a lot to me. I love doing it. This is a Native youth camp in 2019 at St. Gabriel's in North Dakota. And this had about 40 students from all over the country, including Alaska. And then it met again this summer in person after not meeting for a couple of years. And I believe they had 24, I think. It was a smaller group. It was still an important group, but we're hoping to build that back up because we were really on a roll, and then COVID came. This was winter talk this last year. We had, as I say, I think 130 people registered, but we had to all be in our little Zoom windows. So it looks like this. In our next picture, this was the last event where Reverend Dr. Brad Hoff represented us at the Anglican Indigenous network meeting at Lambeth. And Rachel, you were there too, were you not? You didn't get to go. Funding for two, okay. Because Rachel is also a member of the AIN, Anglican Indigenous Network. So that's a global group. And one of the projects I'm working on, we're dying to get to go to New Zealand because the gentleman on the left here, Paul Reynolds, he wants to do a project with us on competency-based theological education, which we're working on with Bexley Seabury Seminary. I'll tell you more about it, but we don't have the funding to go to New Zealand yet. Now, the question comes, now that you've seen all of this, with all of this good stuff going on, why did we want to get involved in the church back in the 19th century? You know, it's good stuff now. We've healed to some extent. We're pushing forward, but why did we want to do this? You know, what was the point of doing all of this? Well, there were some actual reasons. One thing is that it was illegal for us to perform our ceremonies. The ghost dance was outlawed. The sun dance was outlawed. We were not free to worship the Creator in the way that we had been doing it for thousands of years. 10,000 years in Alaska, 65,000 years in Australia and New Zealand. We have records of worship of the one God for that long, but it was illegal for us to do it in the way that we had done it. So it would be if suddenly the Holy Eucharist was made illegal. You're just out of luck on how you've been doing your worship for thousands of years. But if you joined this other church that came on board, then you could worship the Creator. It was out of a necessity to survive in some cases because there were churches that were benevolent to the Native people, and they were feeding us and helping us with clothing and other things. And then there was the identification with the Christ figure that we believe is in our own traditions. And I'm going to give you an example of that. My husband and I have done 13 years of short-term ministry in the churches of Northern Alaska at the invitation of the diocese and the people. And it's above, in some cases, above the Arctic Circle. So we have gone there at Christmas and Easter for about 13 years because there weren't enough clergy. Now I'm happy to say that they have a really strong effort now to train up lay leadership and to do Well, it's going to be a Eucharist under special circumstances, where with reserved sacrament that is blessed by the bishop on Friday morning in Fairbanks, and then put on a bush plane and sent out to the village churches where the trained but not ordained lay leaders can administer communion. So that's what's going on now. So there's a real effort to change things. But when we were going not so long ago, actually just prior to COVID, we had to stop with COVID. One of the villages, my husband asked the elder who we were visiting in her home, what was it like when the missionaries came? What was it like in the village? What happened with your traditions? And I'm summarizing quickly a long story, but she said basically, it wasn't that big a deal because we already had Jesus. She said, we've been here for 10,000 years and we already had Jesus. And so he asked, would you tell me a little bit more? And she said, well, just look at our values and how we live. We live the way we were taught to live by our elders and our ancestors, and that's the way Jesus teaches. So we already had Jesus, and we weren't afraid of him. We weren't surprised by him because we already knew him. We already had the Creator, because our indigenous people are monotheists. And so they had Creator and they had stories and traditions, and they had Jesus. Now, a lot of people have said to me, well, that's not really Orthodox, you know? And I said, well, are you saying that they were without Jesus for 10,000 years when their values are aligned? What about John 1:1? The Word was there at the creation, and the Word we see as Jesus, and Jesus is God. So if they had God, didn't they have Jesus at the same time? Makes us stop and think. Because I'm not in a position of telling people for 65,000 years they were damned because they didn't have the Jesus in human form. In fact, I think Jesus in human form was sent because some of the folks that were around were not doing too pretty good a job at how they were living. And so God said, let me make it a little more concrete for you. Will you recognize me if I show up as a human being? And some of us said, no, we've got it put together pretty well. Well, the bottom line is that when you start talking about Indigenous theology and exploring Indigenous theology, we can go to the next slide now. There we go. It's complicated. And that's what we're going to deal with today. It's complicated because many of us don't see that we were deficient in any way. And many of us, as you know, if you study the mound builders in the continental US, there is abundant archaeological evidence of substantially complex worship centers, particularly around Missouri, particularly New Mexico and Arizona. Clearly, people were worshiping, and clearly they were civilized. But we decided in the doctrine of discovery that they were not Christian, so they were not people, which is an agenda for a different training program, but that was the bottom line. If you're not a Christian, you're not civilized. If you're not a Christian, you're not a person. So the native people were considered flora and fauna, the same level as flora and fauna. We were animals. And if we're not people, well, then we can get killed and it won't matter, because it's like hunting an animal. Now, I want to look at this slide with you, and those of you who had my course, you'll recognize it because this is what I'm trying to illustrate, is that we have two worldviews, but they intersect, and they intersect along common values. But I want you to look at this picture, because if you think about it, you could either picture yourself as the horseman up on the mesa here, or you could be driving along in the bottom of the desert, and your perspective is going to be different. They're both going to be right, but they're going to be different. So if I'm up above looking out over the desert, I'm going to have the big picture view, and I'll be able to see if somebody's creeping up on me because I can see that. And if I'm down on the desert floor, then I'm going to be paying attention to, is somebody behind me, to the side of me, or in front of me on the highway? It's a different view, but they both have elements of correctness. And that's the thing we're going to be struggling with today. We see the Creator as present and connected with all living things. We're a little bit like a Buddhist in that sense. For us, everything is living and everything is important. And for me, everything is sentient. So I want to think twice before I kill something that's living, especially if it's a human being. I'm not going to do that except maybe to save my own life or that of a child. So we pray to the four directions, and that is often expanded to include two more, up and down. So north, south, east, west, above us and below us. We believe that our elder brother, Jesus, walks with us and has walked with us for thousands of years. We bring sacred things from the earth into our worship ceremonies because they're sacred. And our bridge to the Creator is the land. So when the land is taken, our connection to God is broken. And that gives me chills to say that, but that's a significant difference in worldview. So we think that the Bible says we're to be caretakers, overseers of living things, but we're not there to subordinate them to ourselves. We're there to be with them. In the Chief Seattle video, we saw them as we're members of the web. Did we show that? Oh, what happened to it? Oh, it's coming. Okay, good. Oh yeah, I see it. Yeah, it's next. I was saying it's so perfect. Did we show it earlier? What? Excuse me. So we're also Episcopalians. We're Anglicans. Rachel and I are Anglicans. Yeah, so how do we put that thing together, you know? Well, it's going to have to do with something that Jesus called us to do and something that we took vows to do when we were baptized, and that is to promote social justice for everyone and also to forgive people when they wrong us. For every native Christian, that's the big one. That's a hard thing to do. It doesn't matter. We're called to do it if we call ourselves Christians. So a lot of non-natives struggle with us as native people or indigenous people calling ourselves Christians because we do things so differently. And then we internalize that. And so when we went to Alaska for the first time, we asked the archdeacon, is there something we should be able, what shall we include in the liturgy that we might not know to include? We're trying to be polite. Like she said, what are you talking about? And I said, well, in our part of the country, we burn sage, like incense. We don't, we would burn sage or sweetgrass or cedar. She's like, we don't do that up here. We do up here just the right thing, just like you would do if you were in the city in Los Angeles. We do it the same way you do it. We use the real Book of Common Prayer. Yikes. So instead of, we're trying to be polite, but we're just stepping all over their feet and doing it because of something called internalized oppression. Internalized oppression says, do it the way the majority culture does it, and you'll show people you know what you're doing. You drag that sage out and put it on the altar, or come in with a big honking drum, you don't know what you're doing. You're doing that Indian thing. So there's some tension there. See, that's what we're always trying to negotiate. How do we indigenize the service, which for us is sacred, without being offensive to people who don't understand that it is sacred? But we're still Episcopalians and we're still all here, so we're still trying. And that's the beauty of the Episcopal Church. We're still trying. We don't have it quite together, but we're trying. And we're being honest about what we don't know exactly how to put together. This I want you to see just as a beautiful representation of the concept of we are all connected, because you live in this beautiful thing. This is from Chief Seattle.
How can you buy the sky? How can you own the rain and the wind? My mother told me, every part of this earth is sacred to our people. Every pine needle, every sandy shore, every mist in the dark woods, every meadow and humming insect are all holy in the memory of our people. My father said to me, I know the sap that courses through the trees, as I know the blood that flows in my veins. We are part of the earth, and it is part of us. The perfumed flowers are our sisters. The bear, the deer, the great eagle, these are our brothers. The voice of my ancestors said to me, the shining water that moves in the streams and rivers is not simply water, but the blood of your grandfather's grandfather. Each ghostly reflection in the clear waters of the lakes tells us memories in the life of our people. The waters murmur in the voice of your great-great-grandmother. The rivers are our brothers. They quench our thirst. You must give to the rivers the kindness you would give to any brother. The voice of my grandfather said to me, the air is precious. It shares its spirits with all the life it supports. The wind that gave me my first breath also received my last sigh. Will there be any spirit my people left? My ancestors said to me, the earth does not belong to us. We belong to the earth. The voice of my grandmother said to me, teach your children what you have been taught. What befalls the earth befalls all the sons and daughters of the earth. Hear my voice and the voice of my ancestors. The destiny of your people is a mystery to us. When the view of the ripe hills is blotted by talking wires, where will the thicket be? Gone? Where will the eagle be? Gone. This we know. All things are connected like the blood that unites us. We did not weave the web of life. We are merely a strand in it. Whatever we do to the web, we do to ourselves. If we sell you our land, care for it as we have cared for it. Hold in your mind the memory of the land as it is when you receive it. Preserve the land in the air and the rivers of your children's children, and love it as we have loved it.
When the animals start to die, the rainbow warriors will come. How are we doing? We will have another small group, but it will be toward the end, and we're more than halfway through our slides. We're about halfway through our session. Do you want to stand up and stretch a little bit? I'm assuming that if you want to go to the restroom or something, you'll just do that. But please, let's stand up and just stretch a little bit and move around. It's a long time to sit for 3 hours.
All right, everyone, if you'll come take your seats, we'll begin again.
So I thought you might like to see this slide as a follow-up, but I think the most beautiful thing that video could do was emphasize that we are all connected. You know, that is the big worldview piece for all Indigenous Christians and non-Christians, because some walk the red road. And that's kind of another story, but there are many Christians who consider themselves to be religious but not Christian. And they are from the Native American church and basically are legal users of peyote. And so instead of burning sage or some of the things that we might do, they are users of peyote, and they use that to inform their spirituality. And that is a legal use, and they're quite wonderful people. And I read one article in preparing for this of the commonalities between the Native American Red Road Church and Christianity. There are a number of values that we hold in common. So, all right, so this is where the land for us is sacred. There's no other way to put it. It's sacred. And everything that lives on the land is sacred and made by the Creator. So another concept that we have in our theology is the concept of balance and harmony. And the goal is that things will be kept in balance. And this is an example of what happens when we're not caring for the land properly. And we would go so far as to say that something which destroys harmony and beauty on the land or among its people or living things is evil. So something that destroys Amazon rainforests, for example, would be an example of something that is evil, because it's destroying balance, it's destroying harmony, and it's destroying the beauty of the earth. So that's a little hard to swallow sometimes. Now, I wanted to just show you, the next slide will be, these are general values between Indigenous and non-Indigenous. And there's a little bit of oversimplification, so forgive me for that. But if you think about our systems, where we're looked at, I'll give, well, I don't want to give that example. I want to preserve that confidence. Sometimes when we go to an Indian reservation, it looks so bad, quote unquote, in the eyes of majority culture members, that we think that the people who live there must not be very smart, or maybe they're drug users, or maybe they drink all the time, because those are big problems on reservations due to the poverty. But what we don't see is what's beyond the material. And when you go, if you go to a reservation and you stay with people who have invited you there, then you will see the family life, which is very rich. The same problems that are inherent in city living are also found on reservations. So are there drugs and abuse of drugs? Yes. Is there alcoholism as a problem? Yes. Is there domestic violence as a problem? Yes. Is health care sufficient? No. But the problems that we see on the reservation are not because they're native people who are not intelligent. They're victims of poverty. And when we see those same things in the city, the people who suffer from them are often victims of poverty. So what we're really seeing is poverty from an economic system that doesn't permit abundance in certain populations. In Indian reservations or Indigenous reservations, that's one place where abundance is found among the people and in the family structures, but not in material goods. So we value the people, and the system values the person's possessions more and evaluates people by what they have. We respect elders to the point of taking advice and showing respect, sometimes when in our head we know that we're not maybe going to want to do it that way, but we still show respect for the elders by including and asking for advice and following it. We do not emphasize youthfulness. The wisdom comes from knowing more stories. The more stories you know about your people, the more you learn from the stories, the more wisdom one acquires. Youthfulness is great and we honor it, but it's for beginners, right? I thought that might be popular in this particular group, looking around. These are elders here. Good. We are very humble. I mentioned that it's bad manners for us to self-promote. So we're not going to go out and hire an image builder. That wouldn't be in our picture. We honor the past. I wouldn't say we plan for the future, but we live in the present a lot more, and we don't spend a lot of time in futuristic planning. We emphasize the mystery, like the poetic response of when the animals die, the rainbow warriors come. What does that mean? Well, that means what it means. The rainbow warriors will come. So poetic responses for us are literal responses. The rainbow warriors will come because my grandmother told me they would. We harmonize with nature as opposed to dominating it. And we try to explain it. Like when I was a little girl growing up, I was afraid of thunder. And my Indian mother my grandmother said to me, you don't have to be afraid of it because it's just the potato wagon. I'm like, what is that, Grandma? She said, well, when it's raining, the people have to get the potatoes in the wagon and get them inside. So you can hear them bouncing around in the wagon when they take the potatoes inside during the rain. Okay. That's when I hear thunder today, it's the potato wagon, because that was the answer from an elder in my tradition. Now, I could try to pull it apart and analyze it and all that, but no, it came from my grandmother and her tradition. So for me, it's the potato wagon. We emphasize community versus individualism, and we definitely emphasize cooperation versus independence. So you will have higher social status if you are serving others and working in tandem with others than if you've gotten your own. I'll give you an example of that. We got involved on the Blackfeet Reservation with the creation of a food co-op in Hart Butte. It wasn't our idea, it was the idea of the mother of one of the people you saw earlier in the picture. And she is non-native, but she realized there was a serious problem with food gouging, price gouging in the local grocery store in Browning, which is about 25 miles away. And so it was cheaper for her to get her neighbors together, and they would borrow a van and drive all the way to Great Falls, 125 miles each way, and go to Sam's and buy the food and bring it back and just add to it the cost of the gas. And they could still sell it for cheaper than you could buy it in the store, the commercial store in Browning. And so they needed some help, and my husband got involved and helped them to get a van because the borrowed vans kept breaking down. So Jody Horn would be honored for that idea, and everyone who worked together on that idea would be honored for that, because they work together as a family, as a group, as opposed to, oh, I can go start a store and then I'll keep the profit of it. Yes, you can do that, and that's okay. But that's not how we would want you to do it. In Minto, Alaska, where we have served, it's at the end of the Alaskan highway, or no, that's Circle. You can drive to Minto. It's about 80 miles from Fairbanks on a haul road. You go about 40 miles on blacktop and about 40 miles on gravel. And these are some of their values. And these are their words. I have the reference here. Every Athabascan is responsible to all other Athabascans for the survival of our cultural spirit and the values and traditions through which it survives. In other words, if it's our culture, it's our responsibility. And I'll show you that in detail on this slide. Since the print is, I don't know if you can read that, but the idea is that we teach these values. Now, these are the values that I think align pretty darn well with Christian values. Respect of knowledge of the language, respect for others, respect for nature, love for children, knowledge of the family tree, humor, hunter success, humility, responsibility to the tribe, sharing, respect for elders, avoiding conflict, hard work, spirituality, family roles, and domestic skills. Those are the values that would be on a poster in every classroom and often in the living rooms of the people, and we've seen them there. In fact, I was going to show you the actual poster. They used to sell it for $1 at the university in Fairbanks, University of Alaska, but it's out of print. So I just showed you the values instead. Now, we're going to move on from what we've had onto a little bit of what it feels like and what the struggles are to be Indigenous and Christian. And we have someone here, and that would be Rachel Tabor Hamilton, who published an article about her story. In the article, I'm going to show it to you. I'm going to show you the title is The Cultural Conundrum of the Indigenous Christian. And I put the reference here, but I'm sure we can make it available to you. It's a wonderful article about what it feels like when you're struggling with being both, and how your family might not react positively toward your decision to be a Christian, never mind a priest. Rachel, is there anything you want to add? Okay, I don't want to tell her story. I want you to read the article, because if you haven't read Rachel's writing, I consider her to be one of the most gifted theological writers in the Episcopal Church today. And being Native, she does not self-promote, but I would be happy to promote by sending you her references. And this article, when I read it, I was like, this is exactly what I want to talk about, but I'm not going to tell your story because that would be bad manners. She did give me permission to say that the article starts by her mother, who was First Nations, noticing that she had a little cross right here, a little silver cross that she was wearing. And the question she asked Rachel was, "What have you done?" Is that the right tone? What have you done? Because a lot of our people feel that we're betraying the cause if we become Christians. So, let me get you. Oh, yeah, let's.
Thank you, Steve. Yeah, my mother very much felt like it was not only a betrayal and potential walking away from Native identity and culture and family, but also worse, being absorbed into dominant culture and becoming the enemy that had killed our people.
Yeah. So how could you join the group that killed our people? Now, my story is different from Rachel's, because my Native grandmother grew up as a Methodist. The Methodists were the ones that made it through her part of the reservation, and she joined the Methodist church. And then when she came to live with us for a while, she had us go to the Methodist church. And I vividly remember at the age of 5 in Sunday school, signing a little paper that said, "I promise I will never drink alcohol. I promise I will never smoke cigarettes." Signed. I could barely sign my name. I mean, I didn't know, I knew how to write my name, but I wasn't in school yet. And I signed that pledge, and you know, I don't smoke. I tried to smoke. I thought it was so cool to smoke in college, but it gives me a horrible physical reaction. I don't know if it's from signing that pledge or not. And I really can't drink alcohol either. It gives me a really bad headache. So I don't know. There was power in that pledge, and there was power. I know power in my grandmother having us do it. So my husband, when I was showing him these slides, he said, "You need to tell your story." Oh, well, that's really bad manners. You know, we don't tell our own story. He said, "But you're an urban native and you're representing the Episcopal Church. You need to tell the people your story." So I said, "Okay, I'll tell you a little bit about my story. What is my spirituality as a Native person, as an urban person, and as a professional person working in the church, in the university, and in the community?" So here's how I do my prayers. I call it the Cathedral of the Car. I do not read morning prayer in the morning, usually. I don't have time because I drive 50 miles to the church each way. So I have 100 miles of commuting. But what I have discovered is if I pay attention while I'm driving, I see remarkable things. while I'm in the traffic. And this road is actually my road that I drive from our home out to Riverside. And it's driving as if we were going through desert in part of it, not forest, but some greenery in part of it. It's very beautiful in the spring. And then when the rain stops, it becomes like a desert. And then, oh, I haven't shown you that yet. Sorry. Or did you show? I'm off by one. Which one are they? There we are. I did not take I did not take all of these pictures, but I did take pictures. Now I'm on to a thing. I should do a book of this. So now I'm wanting to take pictures, but I have to stop and get off the traffic to take the pictures. So I had to take these from stock pictures. But I do have pictures of a fire that I watched from my car, and it was right on the side of the road going to Corona. And this is what my road looks like. And then this could have been my picture, because I did take a picture the other day just for this reason. And this is when the poppies are blooming. Now, I believe that is showing respect for my roots of being connected with the land. I'm very connected with the land. And I give thanks for it every day. And I say prayers in my car. And it didn't take long after I was ordained to get a call from one of the women in the talking circle who asked me, will you pray for me? I'm having a crisis today. And I said to her, I'll be happy to. I'm driving right now. And she said, I need you to pray for me right now. And I said, okay. And I said a prayer while I'm driving. And I realized that's how I pray. I pray when I'm driving. And I've had other people call me and ask for prayers while I'm driving. And I don't get my prayer book out and try to read it. I make the prayer. But it works. I did a prayer yesterday for a woman in the hospital in Riverside. So that is a part of my spirituality. And I think it's native in nature because it's connecting with the people. I also have the talking circle that I have on Tuesday night and the first Saturday of every month. And that's all Native women who are mostly single, raising grandkids, sometimes, dealing with issues in their life that come up. But it's the community. I'm in it. I'm functioning as a priest. And I think that's good spirituality. It's good theology. And I'm sharing these with you because if somehow it helps you to think about it the next time you're commuting, take your eye. I mean, you have to stay conscious with the traffic. I started to say, take your eyes off the car. No. Don't want you to sue me. But as I'm looking here just out this window, there's all the cars. But if I look just a little further, look at all the beautiful trees behind them. That can be praying because you're communing with nature. So if you're an urban person, you might have to be more creative if you want to observe native spirituality. But I think the most important thing to realize, there's another difference. I read this anecdote, and I'm going to probably mess up quoting it, but I'm going to try. What I read in one of the stories was this: I don't make fry bread because it's the Indian thing to do. Because I am Indian, I make fry bread. So I don't say prayers like Stephen Charleston, who you'll meet in just a minute. When he was living in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and he wrote his book about the 4 vision quests of Jesus, his ritual was to go on the rooftop every morning, make a circle of tobacco, stand in the middle of it, and say his prayers. He did that as a native person. That was the tradition. That was what he wanted to honor. And that's what he had to honor. But he didn't do that and to create a liturgy that he could publish or something. It was just his thing to do. You can do that too. You can have your own liturgy, native or not native. You can make a liturgy that may be as simple as, I don't know, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but for me, it's praying in my car, because I'm going to be in that car an hour each way. And I can either be listening to the radio or talking to people, or I could be praying. And in my case, most days I'm praying unless somebody calls me. But I just do it because that's who I am. It just comes. And that's open to all of us. You don't have to be native. I think in Christian terms, that's the Holy Spirit. You're communing with the Holy Spirit when you're having a prayer time or a worship time that is not coming right out of the BCP. But you don't have to be frightened about that, because you're an Episcopalian. It's not going to go away, you know. So you can make it up yourself. I have Eucharist every Thursday morning at St. Michael's, and a little lightweight altar on wheels that was built by a homeless man for me. And we take it outside. And as the food truck comes, the first thing we do is feed everybody a burrito, because Gloria and her ministry team make burritos. Then people get their food. They sit down. The food truck is not here yet. We do Holy Eucharist. The people who come are increasingly elders feeding multiple people in their family, and they don't have the money to pay rent and buy food. So they're short on food. So they come to get food. And they ask me, when will we do church? Well, see, for me, we are doing church. If we're feeding 60 families every week, food in the name of Jesus Christ, as an Indian, that's Eucharistic. For me, that is Eucharistic. But for them, it's, where's the liturgy? So I said, we'll do Eucharist. They love it. And it's in Spanish. And I'm not a fluent speaker. And the curate is not a fluent speaker. Well, he's pretty good. He says he's not fluent, but he's pretty good. So that's what we do. So if we think of ourselves as Christians and let it flow, we can be doing native things, because they just come out of you. They will just come out of you if you open up and look at your actual life and say, what could I be doing? You will get an answer, and it will be the right answer. And we don't have to throw the BCP away. It's just that we don't always have it with us. Here's another comparison of Indigenous theological values and Western religion. Now, there's a lot more that we have in common than we don't. We're both creation-based. But there's a little more emphasis in some of the Christian denominations on getting saved, where we don't really talk about that. And we don't talk about it that much in the Episcopal Church. It's not really quite our theological thing. A lot of the native tribes don't have a word for sin in their language. It's out of balance. It's causing disharmony, something that causes disharmony, but we don't really talk about sin. We also don't have words for hell. Hell. So it would be more like if you did something horrible enough to be banished from your people, that would be the equivalent. But it's not the same vocabulary, theological vocabulary. Randy Woodley, whose book was just published, it's a really interesting book, and it's an easy book to read. I put the reference here. It's called Indigenous Theology in the Western Worldview. He's a Cherokee, and he talks about epistemological orthopraxy versus epistemological orthodoxy. In plain English, in the parentheses, Native people look at truth based on how they've seen other people live. And orthodoxy is based more on how other people have believed. So I may believe what I was taught to believe because it came from someone. Well, we have a circular worldview versus a more linear worldview. we're a little more emphasis on family and kinship leadership. And we tend to believe that all creation has soul. Not just human beings have soul. So those are some of the differences, but I hope you can see that there are quite a few things that we have that are similar. So when we talk about indigenous theology, it's not just black and white or apples and oranges. Now we're coming into the end of our program with the question of how do we work together? How do we put together? And I'm going to introduce you to a very, very simple tool that I think if we could use more of, it would help all of us, not just in theology, but in other areas. And it's called two eyes seeing. Two eyes seeing, or seeing with two eyes. I'm going to skip over to that right now. Here we are. This came out of Nova Scotia, Cape Breton University, and the Mi'kmaq or Mi'kmaq people, specifically Elder Albert Marshall and his wife, are responsible for this because they noticed that natives were not signing up for the science programs. And they wanted to find out why. And so when they began to interview native people, people said, well, we don't do science the way you do science. We're going to the one with the two eyes. Sorry, Greg. Forgot that I'm not running the show here. I'm just skipping through. Here we are. So we learn to see with the native eye. Some of us learn to see with a majority culture eye, but the important thing is we need to do that together so we can see the good in all of us together. And so it's not that what I do is better than what you do, or what you do is better than what I do. It's that if we can see how each of us comes to know something, then we can benefit everyone by putting those things together. So it's a very native organic model called two-eyed seeing. This has a lot of research behind it. This is not new, it's about 10 years old. And they built a science education program around this and related things. So we'll go on to the next one. This is just a 2-minute introduction to it.
That's how it started. The communities, the elders were concerned that there were not any students from their communities going into the sciences.
Two-eye seeing really is, it's and has to be your guiding principles as to how one should live while you are here on this earth.
Two-eyed seeing, as brought to us by Elder Albert Marshall, Mi'kmaq elder at Eskasoni, is recognizing that there are different ways of looking at the world. And maybe two of those ways are the Western scientific way and the Indigenous peoples or the Aboriginal peoples way. And that two-eyed seeing refers to finding the strengths in both of those, the Western and the Indigenous, and mindfully bringing those strengths together, drawing upon the deep understandings that they represent, the strengths of each, and bringing them together to work together to go forward on this planet together.
I feel that what we learned as First Nations people in your own identity, Mi'kmaq, is valuable. I also believe that the concepts being brought on by Europeans is also valuable in today's world. And you try to bring those two together and look at it through two-eyed seeing that both are very valuable and both can be achieved.
Our airs are poisoned, our rivers are poisoned, our forests are pretty much gone, and the animals are extinct even as we speak. With this two-eye seeing, we very quickly realize and see that science is not going to save the environment or the natural world, but rather a change of attitude, change of mindsets.
I see the strengths of Western science as being the ability to look at the physical world, see the patterns within it, and take those patterns apart and find the mechanisms, or try to search for the mechanisms that bring those patterns into existence. And then on the basis of that reconstructed understanding, try to improve upon our material existence often for humans on this world. I see the strengths of the indigenous peoples, on the other hand, of also seeing the patterns in the world, but rather than taking them apart to reconstruct them, it's more of a working of patterns within patterns. In other words, a weaving of yourself and your understandings into the world in which you live. I think one of the most exciting and useful ways to teach science would be to use one of the methods from science itself, which is the compare and contrast. Why can't we educate our science students as to what the mainstream way of doing science is, and compare it and contrast with another way of doing science from an indigenous perspective? Why can't we put them side by side and use them to help a student develop a better understanding of what mainstream science is and what other perspectives on science are? That's a scientific method, compare and contrast. Basically,
the education system has taught us to absorb every knowledge we get without actually questioning it or looking at it from another perspective.
Why do we think that we can teach by focus on the one thing, when the whole of human consciousness is not a focus on one thing? It's always a back and forth, a scanning of the environment, and a compare and contrast, and a past and a future within the present.
With Mi'kmaq identity, as I was growing up, I didn't know any other identity because I was being trained in Mi'kmaq. I was trained in the language, and in the language are embedded all of your oral traditions, all your moral, and all your everyday life. Your history is involved in it, because when you went to bed at night without the competition of television, Atari, and everything else, you had stories. You had stories about your own history. You had stories about everything that it was required to make you into a better human being.
Part of the struggle of anybody, I don't think it matters who you are, is to ask yourself and to learn, who am I? So if an educational system ignores part of who you think you are, simply because it doesn't include your people's understandings, as for example, if the science curricula does not include any of the understandings that Canada's Aboriginal peoples have with respect to the land that they've occupied for thousands of years, then that ability to develop a well-balanced and deep understanding of who you are as a young Aboriginal in Canada today is going to be denied.
Our journey here is not meant for one perspective or one consciousness to get us through. We all need each other. So the lessons that we are trying to put forth now is to our young people. It's going to be much more expedient if we can take the best for whatever tools the white man has brought forth, and the tools what our forefathers had left us with.
This two-eye seeing is valuable when you pick from when you pick from two worlds and try to co-join those two. I find it very difficult, but I know it has to be done. I know I can't crawl into my culture and say, oh, that's all I need to survive in this world. I also know that you need the white man's education to survive in this world and be happy. And I think the white man also needs me to what I have to offer.
We have a challenge ahead of us to bring to the attention of that educational system. The Western way of looking at things is but one way.
Paraphrasing Chief Dan George saying, we shall take the instruments of the white man, his tools and his education, and we incorporate them with ours so we can create a better world for everyone.
I'm hoping that you can see the similarities, even though this is science education. When we think about theology, we can still bridge. What I'm trying to show you this morning is an insight into some of the ways that Indigenous people would look at a problem, or would look at the land, or in this case, would look at how to solve a problem. So if we looked at where we are today, and we were trying to do something with the land, let's say around this cathedral, if we want to really use two-eye seeing, we would want to bring some Indigenous people in with us. A lot of times I'm invited, and I've been invited twice in the next month to preach at a church. And one is every year, the Sunday before Thanksgiving. And some of our natives don't want to do it because they feel it's being just an instant Indian. But I will always do it because I have a mouthpiece and a pulpit to speak from. And you can't have two-eyed seeing if you don't have both people present. So we don't get to say, oh, we don't need the Indigenous people here because, you know, they don't know anything about this. And the Indigenous people don't get to say, those white people invite me, you know, it's like instant Indian time. They don't really care anything about what I have to say, and they don't show up because then we only have half the bridge. I don't think we have that luxury anymore in this country. We have to have all of us at the table. So the last thing we're going to work on today is sacred stories and vision quests. And I'm going to introduce to you, it's a very short video, what a vision quest is and what are the parts. And how many of you are familiar with Bishop Charleston, who's Choctaw? He's an Episcopal bishop. 2, 3, 4, 5. Have you done this book already locally? So only maybe 1 or 2 have actually seen the book. Okay, then it won't be a waste of your time. He's going to teach you in 2.5 minutes the 4 pieces of a vision quest. He's going to point out that everyone, all the cultures have vision quests of one kind or another. And then we're going to look at the vision quest, the first one that he talks about in Matthew 4, verses 1 through 11. It's going to be projected here. And in our small groups, we're going to look at it with those 4 things in mind to see if they're there, because he is obviously a through and through Anglican bishop and priest and seminary president in the past. And what he's doing is giving you a scholarly but an easy to understand view of a very, very important piece of Native theology, and that's the vision quest. And that will help us to come to an end today, but I think it's a way in your small group you can practice a little bit with it. So let's see Bishop Charleston's intro to the vision quest, and then I'll put something up that you can follow in the small group. Okay? And it will have the 4 components. So you can write them down if you want to, but if you forget to, it'll be up here. Okay, Greg, let's go ahead to the, yeah.
A vision quest is generic in this sense. And by generic, what I'm saying is that I don't know of any culture in human history that has had a version of the vision quest. In Native America, the quest was much more popularized. In other words, not only could anyone take it, you were pretty much expected to do it. And the it was to go out and seek an encounter with God. A very direct, intimate, personal, risky encounter with what you understood to be the conscious presence of God in the world. And for us to do that, it meant time of preparation and a time of purification, having people that would help you and selecting the right place to go. And you'd have to go through a trial. You couldn't have food or water. It would sometimes take 4 days alone, sitting in a high, lonely place by yourself. And the reason those elements of the vision quest from our viewpoint are important is because if you want to understand Christian theology from our viewpoint as Native people, Jesus did exactly every one of those steps 4 times in the Gospels. 4 times he followed exactly the Native American style of vision quest. And 4 times he was changed by that experience. And we were allowed to see and participate in that transformative experience through the Gospels to understand the power of his traditional Native vision quest.
All right, the first vision quest that he talks about is the one we're going to work on, Matthew 4, 1 through 11, and that is the wilderness time when Jesus was tempted in the wilderness. And the foundational Native American value of that vision quest is the need to become we rather than I. The second one was the transfiguration, also in Matthew. The third one was Gethsemane. And the fourth one, Golgotha. So those are 4 times in the Gospel of Matthew when he says, this is how a Native American theology looks at what Jesus was going through. Let me put up the small group work now. You're going to have 10 minutes on this. And I have put for you here the 4 components of a vision quest. The first one is preparing for the quest. And that involves activities that are prayerful and purifying. So you're going to be looking for that in the next thing I'll put up will be the slide that has the whole gospel on it. You're welcome to look it up on a phone if you want to. The second step that you're going to look for is community. Where was the community around Jesus when this was happening, that he was in the desert, in the wilderness? The third is the challenge. What was the physically challenging part of the vision quest when he was in the wilderness? What tested his resolve to even be there? He was there 40 days. And the last one is called lament. And that's a time when the person is crying out for help because they have come in touch with their own vulnerability. So where will we see that in the selection from Matthew? And you'll each one have 1 minute to react. I made a typo there, I see, to this piece of the sacred gospel as a vision quest, and see if it makes sense to you. Do you find those parts? Does it make sense, or do you have questions about it? And if you choose to simply sit and listen, that's perfectly all right. It's okay to pass. Are there any questions? So we'll be in the same small groups that we were in when we introduced ourselves. Oh, okay, but will there still be about 5 in the group? Okay, so each person will have about 2 minutes. I mean, you'll have 10 minutes as a group, and if it goes over, we'll know at the end of 10 minutes. Each person doesn't have to talk for 2 minutes. You're going to do it as a group. Okay, so here is the vision quest, chapter 4, Jesus in the wilderness. Can you read it okay? Is it large enough print? Do you want me to read through it? Yes, no. Put your hand up if you want it read. Okay, a few. Then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tested by the devil. He fasted 40 days and 40 nights, and afterward he was famished. The tempter came and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, command these stones to become loaves of bread." But he answered, "It is written, one does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes out of the mouth of God." Then the devil took him to the holy city and placed him on the pinnacle of the temple, saying to him, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you, and on their hands they will bear you up so that you do not dash your foot against a stone." Then Jesus said to him, "Again, it is written, do not put the Lord your God to the test." Again, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. And he said to him, "All of these I will give to you if you will fall down and worship me." Then Jesus said to him, "Away with you, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve only him." Then the devil left him, and suddenly angels came and waited on him. This is what Bishop Charleston identifies as the first vision quest of Jesus. So you're going to look at it in your group, find examples of those 4 components. Okay? And we'll reconvene in 10 minutes. Question? All right, if I could have your attention. If I could have your attention, we will do what's called a whip around. We're going to do a quick whip. We're going to do a quick whip around, and it will just be for one person to say, "Yes, we found them. No, we couldn't find them." I don't want to really get into it, or if maybe there's one you couldn't find that somebody else could respond to. And I was off on the time. We go till 12:30, but it won't take us till 12:30. We'll have time for Q&A, I think. But let me just whip around and see what we find out. Like from this group, did you find all the pieces? You did. I know, because then I'm going to have a question for you in a minute. Oh, that's right. Because there's one that I was having trouble finding. But you found them all.
We found them all, yes.
Okay. All right, let's go to this group.
Well, some of us had trouble with the community one,
Okay.
but you give your answer.
I I think we discussed that a lot of it was sort of inferred in there, like it wasn't necessarily written out, but it's
Okay.
inferred, right?
Okay, all right.
That this, he goes into the wilderness, but his community is still present in him in the same way that I go by myself and pray, but I have my community with me.
Okay, can all of you hear over here? All right, good, thank you. That's good.
Oh, thank you. Oh, we found all of them, but we were talking more about lament toward the end because we were looking for it. We found elements, but that's what we were talking about when you called us back.
Good. I have a question for your group too, then, those two. But
my companion here pointed out to me, which I thought was very important, that the call came right before this, before Jesus was up in the desert, where he gets the call, he's being baptized. And we find that really important for his sending him up right then. He leaves there, goes right to the desert to find what he's doing to challenge evil. So it seemed very important to me that that's the first step.
All
right
right.
before that.
Thank you. We'll come to your group.
We got to all but the very last part, and we were still trying to find where is the lament.
Okay. All right. Well, this group said they found them all, so we.
In our group, we struggle to find consensus and community and lament.
And lament, okay. Thank you.
Jack?
We had trouble with lament. I think we tried to fit a round one into a square peg.
Okay, I understand. Thank you.
In our group, we found everything except, we actually did find everything in the end. We did have trouble finding lament also, but then at the very end of the discussion, we realized, well, his being famished is a lament. He got to a place of, and so that's kind of non-linear because it comes at the beginning of the passage, but he had that. And I guess that covers those
All
different
right.
parts.
Thank you. It's the hot potato.
We also found them inferring for some of them.
All right. Was lament one of the ones you inferred?
Yes.
Okay. And then it's back to this table. Oh, was there one more table?
No, I think.
This table said they found them all.
So speak up.
I had trouble finding lament too, so I'm.
So we thought about lament in the context of vulnerability, and we talked a lot about Jesus's response and being almost a form of addressing conflict, and how that was a cry to being able to address the situation.
Okay, all right. Did all of you hear that? No, do you want us to?
Sure. So I was saying that we looked at, I'll just read so when Jesus says, "Away from me, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only." We talked about that in the context of being vulnerable and being able to come from a place of truth telling, and that took strength and vulnerability to be able to do that. And so that sometimes that form of communication can be a sense of crying out when you're addressing what is needing to be clarified and to be called out.
All right. Yeah. Good.
And in the context of Vision Quest, it's also a transition in identity. So all of that is like this huge lament that he actually has to be this thing that people are calling him to be, and leave his old life behind.
Yeah.
And finally, goodness, that's great. Very loud. And finally, he wasn't crying, but he sure was pissed off.
Yeah, he said, "Get away from me." See, I think I thought maybe he was sort of crying there where he was like in frustration. Get out of here, get thee away from me, Good, good. So you've just crossed over now and practiced native theology. That is what Bishop Charleston is saying. It's, you know, that is it, that we go through these things at trying times in our lives and we cry out for help. Did I leave a table out? No. I was coming to Zoom to see if, Jennifer, do we have any who would like to add from the Zoom participants that they would like to add something to the group here? Is there anything in the chat? Did all the people at home go out for a hamburger? Whoa. 70. If there's anyone online, we love you and we don't want to forget you. If you wanted to say something from your group or from yourself, just raise your hand and we will give you that opportunity.
Anything? Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah, raise your hand. Hello?
Hello. I don't think we're being seen.
Oh, we're unmuted.
There we go.
Speak. Tony, go ahead and speak.
No, it's Aretha.
It's me, I'm Doretha. I would say that what he brought back with him from the Vision Quest as a whole was he brought back what he learned and what he understood out of that Vision Quest. He brought that back to the community. And so there's the connection to the community as well. He brought what the growing and the learning and what he got out of it brought back to improve the world and to help and to heal.
All right. So the community was who he brought the learning back to.
Right.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, good.
Antoinette?
Okay, our group thought that chapter 3 of Matthew was really important because in front of the community, even though he knew he was the Son of God, in all humility, he was baptized, purified, starting fresh. His preparation for his time on the desert was in the eyes of the community and the support of the community. And this would be very, very similar to most Indigenous observations as well.
All right. Thank you. That's helpful. Thank you so much. All right. Then I think we're going to move on to our last 3 slides here. And thank you for that. I think Bishop Charleston would have enjoyed hearing your comments. Let me flip over to our last section to cover the last thing that was promised to you in the write-up was how does any of this fit into theological education? How does that work? And I called it Theological Education, New Ways for a New Day. And I'm not going to go over these in detail, but I will read them out loud. We're in the next one, it's slide 58. There we go. Now, these come from another major leader in the Episcopal Church who is Martin Brokenleg. He went to seminary in the 70s. He taught for many years in Canada at Vancouver School of Theology. I think he's retired from there now, but he published back in 2008 and it's still holding up today, still very well respected. Themes in theological education for Indigenous people. So I'm not going to belabor each one, but I'll read them out loud so that all of you can see them. Indigenous theological education permits active learning in physical and spiritual Indigenous contexts to balance and/or replace reading and writing. So more emphasis on doing and less emphasis on traditional academic paperwork, as in writing papers. It is deeply spiritual and it transcends the thinking only approach. It focuses on being in right relationship. That's a term you hear a lot in Indigenous spirituality, having a right relationship with all things. Teaches how to communicate in non-native contexts, and teaches how to communicate in non-native contexts by drawing parallels between Indigenous and non-native traditions. So again, it's the compare and contrast that we heard in the discussion of two eyes seeing. Let's go to the next. The other themes that Professor Broken Leg, I believe he's also a priest, so I should say Reverend Broken Leg, incorporates the wisdom of the elders for the future. So learning what the elders are saying now and using that to plan for the future, where we said earlier, Indigenous work is less futuristic, but what he's saying is put them together. It leads the learner to a healing truth, emphasizes the dynamics of forgiveness, reconciliation, and peacemaking, honors the traditions of the past, and adapts to the present. And finally, collaborates with Indigenous peoples around the world, not just locally. So these are the themes that Martin Brokenleg advocates we should keep in mind if we are designing theological education for Indigenous people. And guess what? That is my job. Not by myself, thank goodness. So we'll go to the next slide. Now, these are not appropriate to try to show because the print's too small, so I'm not going to read them to you, obviously. But I am going to point to you that there are two newly designed and funded to the tune of $200,000 for each one by Trinity Wall Street Foundation. These are two new programs that we are hoping to initiate in January of 2023. And they are specifically designed for Indigenous church leaders who aspire to stay as lay leaders, and some aspire to become ordained people. But you don't have to be looking at ordination to be able to be in these programs. We have had the request, can I be in the program and I'm not Indigenous? And the answer to that is, as long as we preserve a 50-50 split. But they have been designed to, excuse me, to fund 10 Indigenous people in each program. The first program is a Master of Divinity program that will be offered at Bexley Seabury Seminary, and it will make use of some of the same classes that are taught, but they will be redesigned to incorporate and integrate religious practices and theological practices from Native America. And that is the MDiv program. And the other thing that is very unique about it is that it will be a competency-based program. So instead of the person proceeding through and getting course credit, I take Old Testament, I get 3 credits. Take the second half of Old Testament, I get 3 more. Take Old Testament beginning and later, 6 credits. That's the traditional way of doing it. This builds a whole list of competencies by analyzing first, what do we want the graduates to be able to know and do at the end of the program? Then experiences are tied in with those learning outcomes. The other thing that's new about it is that instead of taking only exams and written papers to be graded with a red pen by the professor, The people's progress through the program will be assessed by a professor from the seminary, by an elder from the community where that person will be going, and by a spiritual director or one other person that the student has identified as being a significant spiritual influence or theological influence in their life. So it's a committee-based assessment program. And that will be the one for the Master of Divinity. I ate some almonds over there and they're kind of sticky here. The second one will be oriented toward becoming a church leader, but it will not be a graduate level program. There's actually nothing that says a person must have a Master of Divinity to be a priest or a deacon. It's really up to the committee, the COM in each diocese and the bishop to decide how they're going to form leaders in their place. In our situation, we have a lot of Indigenous people who have been running churches for years. They do not have seminary background. They are not in a position to leave and go to seminary, and they don't have a bachelor's degree. So even though we could give them a scholarship to get a master's degree, they may or may not be equipped academically to start doing graduate work. So the second one is called the 2+2 program. This is a really unique collaboration. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Between Bexley Seabury Seminary and Sitting Bull College in North Dakota. Sitting Bull College is a tribal community college, one of only 3 that is permitted to offer a master's degree and a bachelor's degree. So what we're going to do is start our people in courses that are not degree courses, but are professional development courses in the Pathways program at Bexley Seabury Seminary. It's an online program, so they don't have to move anywhere. And they will take the courses that are permitted by the canons as licensing courses. So you could be a licensed lay reader. You could be a licensed pastoral care person. You could be a licensed preacher, a lay preacher. There are 7 of those, and they will be able to, those will be built into the first 2 years. Then the next 2 years, they will take their courses online through Sitting Bull College. They will take 6 to 8 theology courses, but they're applied theology courses. So if they're taking a course in preaching, they would have already had a lay preaching course in the first 2 years, but the preaching course in the advanced level would involve doing preaching, analyzing sermons, but being evaluated on preaching by writing sermons and giving those sermons and getting feedback on those sermons. And it will be their committee that will assess them. So they'll be assessed by somebody in the church they're leading, someone from the faculty, someone from their spiritual guide. The 2+2 program is a 4-year program, but when they come out the other end as graduates, if they want to, they will be able to have an AA degree. So they'll come out now from no degree, they'll go to getting an AA degree that they can transfer into a bachelor's degree program if they want. Because Sitting Bull College is a fully accredited college and has a bachelor's degree program. So they won't have a Master of Divinity, but in many of the situations, the bishops are thrilled to have a systematic way of educating them so that they will have a lot more actual academic work than they have now. So those are the way that the Episcopal Church right now is on the way to integrating Indigenous theology and our traditional Anglican coursework. Any questions? I have the contacts. Dr. Julie Lytle is jlytle@bexleyseabury.edu. And my own, should you need to contact me for anything, it's mchrist@episcopalchurch.org. So this kind of brings us to the conclusion of, with one exception, and our content, I think we have covered now, but I want to end this with a very special thing. And I'll wait till it comes up. There we go. So this is Lewis and Clark Hotel in Montana. And it is the site at this event of a gathering to organize a Bring Back the Buffalo effort for the reservations in Montana and surrounding states. The person who is the spiritual director at this is the person who signed the paperwork that allowed me to go to college on Blackfeet money. And his name is Earl Oldperson. Chief Earl Oldperson was the ceremonial chief long after he was the traditional chief for about 50 years for the Blackfeet Nation in Montana. This is very native. So you're going to hear some kids in the background at the beginning. It's not professionally, no videography. It's somebody probably not even with a cell phone, maybe with a cell phone. But he does tell about the buffalo, how it affected him and all of us when they were gone. And he prays in Blackfeet and then translates it into English. So I wanted to use it instead of giving a prayer myself. I'm offering this as a tribute to Earl Oldperson. And I hope that you'll forgive that the videography is a little shaky because it's filmed on site, probably by one of the tribal members. And then when we finish this, we will have concluded our content for the morning, and we'll have time for any Q&A that you might want to make. And that goes for all of you. And I want to thank all of you who took the time to be online at home. And I wish you could be here, but we're really glad to see you. And you'll be welcome to participate in the Q&A as well. All right, let's go ahead with this last video. It's about 4 minutes. It's not too long.
Okay, before I pray, our people lived with the buffalo, and that was our source of life. Every part of the buffalo was part of us, and our people followed. There was a time when our people were without the buffalo, and they were looking for the buffalo. And a place called Buffalo Lake in the Blackfeet Nation. It's on the east, towards the eastern part of the reservation. That's where they were during the winter time. As they were looking for the buffalo, they wanted something to eat. So one of the men that was walking, they heard someone singing. They heard a song. They didn't know where it was coming from. Anyway, they were looking for who it was. Finally, it come up on Buffalo Stone. That was the one that was singing the song. And this is the song that Buffalo sang. He's singing. He told the people, you go certain place, there's the buffalo. You will find that help the people that were starving. They were wanting the buffalo. Let us pray. Ayaw nina. Como que no existe coisa. Ang qualquer sa aqui. Iskanato. Porque como se sa ini. Look sa pagkatiis na ini. Ano kay nagtapin na ni istipatapi. Basta ya mo se sa ini no kamo. Istaya mo se. Ika kimak, anaka ki sakyo tayo sa tapiwang ini. Napaka mo sipi, ini. Oh, Creator, we ask that you will help protect and direct these people that are trying to protect our source of life, the buffalo. We ask that you will guide them as they go forth in this effort. We ask that you will continue recognizing our way of life, our way of life is above. And so today, I ask that you continue helping these people, whoever is concerned, that you will help direct. We will bring back our life above. And as we do, it will become greater. The source will be greater. We ask this. Oh, Earl, there's a copy. Oh.
So you've now heard about the buffalo stone. We believe that the buffalo stones sing, and you can still find buffalo stones on the reservation today. And what he was saying is when you find one, its song will tell you where the buffalo are. So in the days when there were still buffalo and they could go hunting for them, they would look for the buffalo stone to tell the hunters where to go to find the food. In fact, we did not have horses in the early days. We had dogs, and we had people who would run and make noise to run the buffaloes off a cliff. And then they would die at the bottom of the cliff, and the whole tribe would gather there at the bottom of the cliff to dress out the buffalo meat and to cut the fur to make buffalo robes and to use every last piece of each buffalo. So when the buffalo were gone, it wasn't just the food source that was gone, it was the whole economy that was centered on the buffalo. So I give thanks for his life, for the many, many years of service that Chief Old Person gave to all of us. And I especially give thanks that he made it possible for me to go to college. So that's my tribute to him. I want to thank all of you for being here. We will have time for some Q&A right now, and I'll open it up for that. We've completed our program for today.
So if you'll just
Steve?
raise your hand here, or if you're on Zoom and want to speak, you can either raise your hand or put a question in the chat, and we'll read that as well.
Hi.
Hi.
In the presentation, it mentioned peacemaking as a value of Indigenous cultures. And I was wondering specifically from your context, if there's an image or an expression that represents peacemaking or sharing peace.
I don't know my language, regrettably, so there may be in the Blackfeet language itself. I can't think of a specific term that would mean that other than variations in English. Yeah, thank you. That's a good question.
When we were
doing the Vision Quest exercise, we remembered you said that only men did Vision Quests. And
In my tribe.
In your tribe. So we were trying, are there, how would a woman do a Vision Quest?
So the women had their own rites of passage, and it would have been done in a women's circle to bring, now it varies tribe to tribe. In our tribe, it would be bringing people together to learn the traditions of what women did. And for example, in our tribe, the women are the ones that would take down those enormous teepees and get them ready to move to the next place. And they would put them on the pole, the lodge poles, you know, they're quite tall. They cut down lodgepole pine. The men would cut them down and strip them, but it was the women's job in the early days to put up the teepee and to take it down and get it ready to travel. So it would be mentoring the young women to learn those various things. The Navajo tradition, they have a 15, I think it's 15 days long, a rite of passage, a ceremony for the women. It's quite detailed and quite extensive. And it's a coming of age for the women.
So Don Ibsen on Zoom has raised his hand.
Oh.
Yes, is this whole session being recorded by the diocese, and will there be a DVD available that we can buy or whatever?
The question of is this being recorded? It is. It will be posted to the St. Mark's Cathedral website, and we'll share it with the bishop, who will share it out to the diocese as well. So, and we'll also, if it's okay, we'll post the slides or a PDF of the slides that would be a companion to the recording.
Sure.
Yep. It'll take us a few days to get that ready, Don.
Will there actually be a DVD that one can order?
There won't be a DVD. It'll be all on the internet, though, so it's easy enough to pull it up and play it from there, just off of the link.
All right.
Thank you.
Over here, Kristen.
Oh, here's one of my friends from elementary school who lives in Switzerland. Patricia. We haven't seen each other for like, I don't know, 50 years. Okay, you're muted, Pat, you're muted. I knew she was going to try to be on.
Okay, it's been almost 50.
Yes, it has.
Yeah.
Look wonderful.
It was in Edinburgh.
Yeah, yeah. We went to school and together. And she went to the university.
She was so smart.
Oh.
She was
really.
Oh, she was so smart.
She was the one who got she is a linguist, and she got, you were a chemistry major too, right? I know.
Yes, yes.
She was a chemistry major at the University of Texas, married a guy from Switzerland.
From Germany.
Because she could speak. I remember when you wrote me and told me that they discriminated against you in Switzerland because she spoke German so well. They said she had a German accent, and they didn't speak German in that way. So they didn't want a German in Switzerland. She grew up in South Texas, where I did. Do you remember
Mary.
that?
Mary, I thought you would be a molecular biologist.
I know, until I got to organic chemistry and went. I was telling Stephen.
This has been wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Privilege of being here. Thank you.
We'll be in touch. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.
Yeah.
That's amazing. That's the beauty of electronics.
There's a question here. Yeah.
There's a question inside here. Just a minute, and then we'll come back to take one from the group.
This is sort of a comment/question. It strikes me that a vision quest, I was curious if it's ever used less as a purposeful thing that you set out to do and more of a framework for looking at things going on in life. As I was listening to it, I thought, oh, I think about some specific tough times in life, and that framework actually is a very helpful way of looking at it. So just a comment / question.
My husband was asking a similar question yesterday when I shared the slides, and I said the closest I could think of was corporate retreats. But you know, where people go on retreats, some people go on individual retreats, they don't call them vision quests, but they go out and study, and I don't think they necessarily do all 4 pieces, as Bishop Charleston mentioned, but I do think that they would be useful, yes, as a way of doing it. You'd want to have someone around you, though, if you really did all 4 pieces, because it's pretty challenging. You're not drinking, traditionally, you're not eating or drinking for 3 or 4 days, and you're out there by yourself. So that's why you want to have a community around you. But yes, I think it could be if you're seeking theological insight or other kinds of insight, if you're open to that, I would think, yes. I can't think of any reason we wouldn't do it.
So Betsy, T's or TAs, if you'll unmute Betsy and ask your question that you put in chat about the new translation.
Yes, Mary, I was wondering if you would recommend to people the First Nations version, translation of the New Testament.
I have a copy of it. Did you ask me that earlier and I wrote you that I didn't have a copy yet? Someone did.
No, I
did
didn't.
have a copy of it. I did look at it. I didn't bring it with me, but I think it would be helpful. I didn't see anything objectionable. It's a paraphrase. It's kind of like some of the other paraphrases. It's just using language like that would be more commonly used on the reservation. I was trying to think of one. What is it that they call Jesus?
That's what I'm just.
One who seeks freedom, or she's talking about
right in front of me.
Creator
sets free.
He who sets free.
Creator, and in the Matthew passage, the devil is called the evil trickster.
Evil trickster. So that would be language that one would understand tribally or in terms of reservation life. I didn't have time to look at it, the whole thing, every word, but I looked at it because I was thinking about using it as a compare and contrast in this workshop. And then I decided I wanted to do something different instead, but I didn't personally see anything at all objectionable about it.
It's a fun take.
Yeah. Thank you for asking.
Okay. We're right at time now.
All right.
Mary, we just want to say thank you so much for being with us today. And again, you'll be here tomorrow as well for the 9 and 11 o'clock services as the preacher in a forum in the space at the 10 o'clock hour. The 11 o'clock will be live streamed.
Okay.
But will you all recognize and express appreciation for Dr. Crist?
Thank you. I just wanted to thank you for taking the time to come. It means a lot. And I appreciate the invitation very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you all for being here. And for those who have joined via Zoom, there are some foods to, please feel free to take some home with you as you exit. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you to all the Zoomers as well.